Hi, everybody, and welcome. I want to thank you for tuning in to another presentation by the Crime Victims Council of the Lehigh Valley. I hope you are all staying safe and healthy as we come to the end of the year and hopefully to start something new. As you see, the topic today will be grief and loss. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, let me tell you a little bit about our agency if you're not familiar with it. So we are a nonprofit, private, comprehensive service. So what that means is we work with anybody who has been a victim of a crime. We started as the local rape crisis center, and as we evolved, we encompass a lot of other victim services. We are in Lehigh and Northampton counties, and in the other 66 counties, if you will, in Pennsylvania, each county has its own center, as well as across the United States. If you move or anything like that, they should have services alike. In addition to being the local rape crisis center and victim services, we are mandated reporters. So what that means is we do have to make a report if anybody divulges any information that will put them at risk of themselves or others. However, if you are talking about your own victimization, we do not report that unless there could be another victimization and you are under the age of consent. Our services are at no cost. They are confidential. And if you are 14 years of age and older, you don't need a parental consent to come and receive our services. The actual services that we provide include direct services or our counseling department. Currently, we are meeting via telehealth. So you might be meeting with a counselor over what we use called doxy.me. That is a HIPAA compliant program that things are kept confidential over your meeting with them. We also offer phone services. And as things progress, we are reevaluating when we are able to bring back in-person sessions. We are also offering some group services. Some of these could include sexual assault and homicide survivors, parental support groups, even young female teenagers, etc. You can visit our website to see what is currently being offered. In addition to the counseling, we have police, court, and hospital accompaniment services. So in addition to our counselors and other individuals in the agency, we have court advocates in Lehigh and Northampton counties. So they are actually placed in the courthouses to support individuals who have been a victim of a crime, helping you walk through the court process, going with you to the court itself. In addition, if for some reason you are in the hospital, we are able to come out to you and be there and support you through that process. We can go down with you to the police station, etc. And then the outreach community involvement piece is the primary piece that I do. It is myself, another educator, and our supervisor. So we go out into the community as young as kindergarten through 12th grade, in colleges and universities, as well as the elder population, conveying such information in a way that we want to create awareness and primary prevention. And in this primary prevention piece, we want to be able to give you the tools to recognize red flags, understand some of these underlying behaviors, and hope to prevent a crime from happening. And in addition, this is our 24/7, 365 hotline. So what this is there for is if you're having a rough night or you're not feeling maybe safe, something happened, you can call this number at 2 a.m., 6 p.m., 3 a.m., etc., and you will get one of our advocates to just be there and listen to you, as well as potentially provide any service in that moment that you might need. So before we begin in regards to the actual content, I just wanted to remind you that this is a sensitive topic. I recognize that, and some of us may have had different types of losses, especially during this year. So be mindful of how you're feeling and reacting. Sometimes pushing away those sad feelings or those angry feelings can be more hurtful than just allowing you to go through it. And overall, take care of yourself. If you need to take a break, please pause the video, take a break, reach out to somebody. Just check in with yourself and your surroundings, because I know this is going to be a lot of information. So again, just breathe, take a moment, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. So wouldn't it though be useful if we had a manual on how to deal with people who are mourning or grieving, right? But we are in Western culture, and Western culture keeps death at a nice, safe distance, right? People are up to, the hospitals or funeral parlors, and it's not an everyday conversation. But perhaps we do us a disservice of leaving this stuff so distant. I know from personal experience, I did not really experience a lot of death until I was older, when I lost my grandmother 4 years ago. And that really put things into perspective, because we did not talk about death in my family. Things were just sort of, if you will, swept under the rug. So grief does make us uncomfortable. People don't know what to say or do. And as a result, people might say some silly, dumb, thoughtless things to grievers. And they might then just avoid somebody altogether that they're, quote, giving the privacy to mourn, right? So the loss of a person is one form of grief, but we have relationships, livelihood, health, etc., and they all take a toll on us. Relationships are often at the core of who we are, what we do, our friends, especially during COVID, not being able to see them in the way that we're used to. We have some of those cultural norms that we should be aware of. What might be useful in my culture might not be so useful in your culture. And we don't feel prepared about it, because then all of a sudden we're thinking about our own mortality or our own life. And as we continue to talk about this, I know this might seem heavy and strange to talk about, but it's very important to have these conversations, make you aware, have conversations with your family, because this stuff is inevitable. So we are awkward about it, we're embarrassed, and we tend to shy away from those who are maybe dying and those who are grieving. So, but when we don't talk about them, we have increased feelings of isolation, loneliness, and distress. So these internal experiences that are perceived to be painful or threatening might just be fears of us losing control when we talk about it. We might embarrass about the loss. And we have shame or guilt. So all these things make grief very difficult for us to talk about, because in a sense, we don't see it as a celebration. So when we talk about death and dying, I personally like to avoid euphemisms, AKA these code words. So these are substitutions of an agreeable or less offensive expression in place of one that may offend or suggest something unpleasant to the listener to make it less troublesome for the speaker. So we often don't say they died, right? We feel like that's harsh. So maybe we say to our younger siblings that they're in a better place, they passed away, they went to sleep forever. However, what happens is they tend to get confused. If you have younger siblings or younger people in your family, they often don't think concretely yet. So they might just think that they were taken. Okay, taken where? When are they coming back? How can we have those conversations, right? Sometimes we talk evasively about it. Sometimes we're trying to be polite, or sometimes, we turn things into a joke. So it's important to be concrete and start kind of getting comfortable with these words. So I do want to say that I will be using these terms, died, death, etc., throughout the presentation regarding when someone has died and what those losses look like. However, we do recognize that there are different types of losses. So we have an actual loss that here you're no longer able to see, touch, hear them. Maybe it is actually a loss of a pet, or it could be even a loss of a body part per se, maybe a car accident. Maybe it could also be a job. The perceived loss includes that this is a unique experience by the grieving person, and that's less obvious to others. So it's how you interpret the meaning of the perceived loss and that intensity of that feeling. So maybe you feel rejected, or you were rejected by a friend, so that therefore creates a loss of confidence in you and changes your status in a social group. So that is your perceived loss of what just occurred. We also have situational. So this is leading to the loss of function, income, life goals, and self-esteem. So again, this could be another type of car accident where you're sustaining physical changes that maybe make it really hard for you to come back to school. We also have a maturational loss that is a form of necessary loss and includes all normally expected life changes across the lifespan. So this helps you as you develop coping skills to use when unexplained or unexpected things happen. So maybe when you start at school, you quote, lost constant care from a parent, right? So you go into elementary school and now you're listening to other people, or you're graduating, or you're going to be graduating, that you have a loss of, you're leaving home. You might not stay in touch with some of those friends or financial support. And it's important to experience those because, like I mentioned, it helps you grow as a person. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between grief, bereavement, and mourning, and what that really looks like to help you make sense of some of these feelings that you are going through. So grief is the normal process of reacting to the loss, right? So it can actually be the death of somebody, or even symbolic, maybe somebody broke up with you. And it's important to acknowledge that there is no one right way of grieving. Everybody experiences grief differently, and everybody's loss is just as valid. So if you have a mental reaction, it could be maybe anger, guilt, sadness. Physical, maybe you're having trouble sleeping, you're not really hungry. Some social, maybe, feelings out having to take care of some other people in your family, seeing friends, or returning to work. And the grief really depends on the relationship with the person who died, the situation, and the person's attachment to whatever has happened. So that's why it's important also to be mindful of emotions in general and understanding what some of these emotions might be telling you, because grief is just more than sadness, right? And you might be overwhelmed by a variety of different emotions and feelings. So we can think about how we can separate grief into thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So how you might think and remember, maybe it's unfair what happened. You're remembering these happy memories. The thoughts that they are at peace. We always hear maybe they're no longer suffering, they're in a better place. Your feelings, but you're feeling, maybe you're in denial. Maybe you're relieved. Maybe you're just feeling shocked. And all these feelings are important. And it's important to have these conversations with your family, with people, because oftentimes grief, like we mentioned, it isolates us. And then our behaviors, maybe we're trying to distract ourselves. Maybe we're trying to go back to normal right away. Maybe we're looking at photos, or we're staying in bed, we're dwelling on things. So with time, the size of these waves of grief that we experience lessen with larger gaps. And as weeks and months and years pass by, it's okay to experience a lot of these firsts, because it's inevitable. Our first Christmas, our first anniversary, birthday, as you navigate, what is happening in each of these moments, it's natural to feel these absences, and that grief can be triggered again. And again, like I mentioned, there is no timeline on grief, but we go through some of these tasks. This is the tier of grief that we often cycle between tasks over and over as we learn to come to terms with the loss. And again, we might always be, in a sense, grieving, going through this process, because we're never going to forget the person, forget the relationship, but we're able to cope and understand better. So the T, to accept the reality of the loss, right? We don't want to necessarily think about what happened or maybe how the person died, because that can get in the way of accepting the reality. But if we are in denial, it hinders that, and it can make us feel worse. So maybe having some rituals or ceremonies can help to accept that the person is physically gone. E, experience the pain of the loss, right? Others around us want us to be okay, so it can be difficult for us to work through that process. However, that avoidance can make grief persist. So there is no formula about which emotions we need to work through, but it's our process. A, adjust to the new environment without the lost person, right? It's, again, different. I want to really hit that home that it's different for everybody, and it will take time to go through. So example, losing a friend who is a big support in your life will involve new ways of connecting with others and doing things, and are reinvesting in this new reality. So finding ways that you can continue to connect, living your new life, holding on to the memories. Maybe it involves new connections, new things. just unable to adjust, and not just thinking in a death term, but for me, I lost a very important relationship in my life through a divorce of my own. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that and how I was able to go through this model and accept the new reality, allow myself to grieve the loss, and still come out feeling good about myself and not be so angry about what happened. So mourning, so grief is internal and it's that inside expression. Mourning is the actual outside expression. So this allows us to re-engage with life and feel joy and happiness again. So this is how we adapt to a loss. A lot of the mourning practices are influenced by cultural customs, rituals, and society's rules for coping with loss. Like I mentioned, Western society, we definitely don't talk about death. We tend to keep it hidden, and it's a very, quote, sad time. So every culture has its own set of beliefs that describe how the world works and our roles. So in societies, though, in which people share the same religion and religious beliefs can significantly shape the culture, and it informs how these cultures approach death. So it's who is present, what ceremonies are performed, moments before and after, how a person's body is handled, if they're cleansed and dressed, where the body is buried, these different options, whether grief is celebrated quietly, privately, loudly, publicly, gender, different ages, who is able to grieve in a certain way, how they are honored, and new roles. So I have a couple of these traditions up here. We can see here that the Muslim traditions that for 3 days, that's the allowed mourning period, except in the case of a widow, and she may mourn for 4 months and 10 days, right? Or the Hindu traditions, funerals are usually held within 24 hours. And friends may call on the family at home, where the body of the deceased is generally kept until a traditional cremation. And here in Christian traditions, which is heavily in our society, is that the body will remain at a funeral parlor before visitation or a viewing, and we express our condolences to the family and welcome to stay for the visit, although it's not required. So again, it's being respectful of the mourning process. Bereavement. So bereavement is grief and mourning combined. It is the period after a loss during which grief is experienced and mourning occurs. And it's the length of time depends on many factors, including the experiences, a personality and coping skills, and the relationship. So we might be in that bereavement period for quite a long time. But we recognize with these losses, we have a loss within a loss, okay? So we have a primary loss, the person who died, the relationship we lost, the job we lost, a body part we lost. And we have a snowball effect that stems and creates multiple losses. So it then impacts other parts of our life, creating multiple secondary losses from that primary loss. So when we look at it, it's all unique, and being aware of these secondary losses can help us assess when we're caught off guard by a new feeling. And these secondary losses are a normal part of our grief, and they need to be addressed and mourned. So thinking about loss of identity, loss of confidence, dreams for the future, etc., because they impact the primary impacts the secondary. Now, I just wanted to bring up this cycle of grief. This was created by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And as we look at the cycle of grief, I want you to pay attention, especially to the top part, the one that has like the little loops. This is what grief is. Grief is not linear. Grief is not stagnant. We can be at any part of the grief cycle at any given time, and we move in and out, in and out. So we have denial. This helps us minimize the overwhelming pain of loss, right? We're reflecting on the experiences we have shared with the person, and we might find ourselves wondering how to move forward. Anger. I know when my grandmother died, I was angry because I felt like she got taken too soon, and there's so many other things that I wanted to do. But, you know, if we're angry, we feel less fear of a judgment or rejection. But when we stay angry, it can feel us leaving isolated and maybe unapproachable when we really need that connection, that comfort. But then we may bargain. So, you know, whoever you believe in, whatever you believe in, you talk to them. If you just let them live, I promise I will turn my life around. I promise I'll never get angry again. I won't yell at them. You know, so we're bargaining, and it tends to focus on our faults or regrets. And we look back that, you know, we're feeling disconnected, or maybe we've caused them pain. So we want to be able to bargain with them to make us feel better, because we tend to make drastic assumptions that if things have played out differently, we would not be in this emotional mess, if you will. And then depression, you know, when bargaining is no longer an option, we choose to isolate. And we feel that loss more appropriately, and we're in a fog that this is, in a sense, real, and it feels more present and unavoidable. And eventually, we get to the acceptance, where this is our new norm, that we are trying to live and adapt, thinking of that tier model. By resisting, you know, at first we want to maintain how life was, but bits and pieces of acceptance, we can move through the cycle better, easily, and we can readjust. We learn to reorganize roles, reassign them, etc. And this is not saying that once you reach acceptance, everything's going to be great. Remember the waves of the grief in our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. It's normal to miss somebody and to think about them, but it's going to also be on your terms and what works for you. So let me take you on a little journey of making friends with grief and the importance of understanding grief. So at first, I tried to outrun, wait out, hide from, and ignore grief. Eventually, I realized my grief wasn't going anywhere, so I could either run from it forever or give in and experience it. Once the cloud of grief consumed me, it was hard to see or feel anything else. This sucked, but only slightly more than running. In the early days of grief, it felt like all the light had been drained from the world and everything was dark. But as the fog of acute grief thinned, a little bit of light crept in, and things started to look a little less scary and a little more manageable. I grew less intimidated by my grief and increasingly confident in my ability to handle its ups, downs, twists, and turns. Once I was able to look grief head on, I realized it's made up of both good things and bad. grief grows from the same seeds as love. So after someone dies, one seldom exists without the other. Over time, my relationship with grief has changed. I see it now as something as nuanced, complex, and beautiful as my relationship with those who have died. Though its ongoing presence is sometimes challenging, I embrace it because it's a source of love and connection with those who have died. So I hope you can see that grief does not always have to be a scary thought, a scary experience, that you can integrate it into your story and become accepting of all the things and make a beautiful cloud representation that just doesn't have to be gloomy all the time. So again, what does this story mean? It means that the reality of the grief often stays with you until the day you yourself die. You know, for those who think of it as being negative, it does seem unmanageable, but the impact changes over time. And by you changing your relationship with grief and responding, you are able to cope and find hope and heal. So if you think about it, grief is one instance where there's a strong benefit to accepting its ongoing presence in your life because it creates more room for comfort, positive memories, and ongoing connection. So let's take a moment to talk a little bit about how does COVID complicate the grieving process, right? So with COVID striking even healthy individuals and hospitals maybe limiting visitations, these experiences are magnified for many families. So without the ability to formally quote, say goodbye, you know, we might be feeling a sense of ambiguous or delayed grief. An ambiguous loss is known as without closure or clear understanding. So it could feel as though the person has not really died despite us knowing otherwise, because we're trying to navigate such other losses, working, having school from home, taking care of siblings while we're trying to do school, not being able to see that person for so long, knowing that they died. And then when things open up a little bit more, realizing we're not able to see that person and we might feel angry. So it's okay to have many feelings at once, to have both good and bad days, to grieve all losses at this time. Things might even come up for you that you did not think would come up. And it's okay to talk about these experiences, find meaning and ways to grow, as well as to embrace the unknown and still remain hopeful. That is your right, and all feelings are valid. So acknowledging that we are in a different time, right? Traditional services for those who we have lost might not be an option. Can we think about planting a flowering tree, writing a letter, maybe having a symbolic ceremony to bury the loved one if that is something that you do? How can we connect? Trying not to let guilt overwhelm us and asking for help from others, right? Because of the pandemic, it's difficult to mourn that death or other losses, such as unemployment, not making enough money, changes in your lifestyle. Maybe you're struggling with school because you're not used to online. These losses can happen at the same time, which then can complicate or prolong grief that is difficult for us to adapt, heal, and recover. So routines and rituals that normally brought us comfort aren't really accessible right now, which increases our feelings of isolation. And two, with COVID, people might be feeling or experiencing stigma, such as social avoidance or rejection. And stigma hurts everyone because it creates fear or anger. And some people may avoid contacting you, your family members or friends, because the stigma related to COVID-19 impacts us. But if we can stay up to date on knowing the facts and being able to share them and not necessarily being so consumed with media and the news and people being arguing back and forth, we can lessen that stigma. And also we might feel though what is called survivor's guilt. It is very natural and it's something to notice and pay attention to. So you need to allow yourself to still have joy and happiness, but it might take a while. But try not to hold yourself back from having positive emotions and holding on to them, because again, grief comes in many forms and there's no one way to grieve. So what about potential separation and divorce, right? Divorce affects more than 1 million children in the United States each year. And it's good to know that it's not your fault, even though it might feel like it's your fault. Your parents love you. And even though it's not a seamless process, there is some grief, right? And parents divorce for many reasons. Maybe it's because they feel that they can no longer live together due to fighting, or maybe their feelings have changed. Maybe they fell out of love. Sometimes though, it's because of serious problems. Sometimes nothing bad happens, but parents just decide to live apart. But maybe you're impacted in a different way because you're not necessarily seeing this as a grief or a lost moment, but maybe we're withdrawing, we're engaging in some risky behavior. Maybe we're worried about finances. How are we going to live? Maybe we need to start getting a job or pitching in more. Maybe we're focusing not very much in school. So sometimes though, it might be hard to believe, but individuals who experience a separation or divorce with their family might become more responsible, better problem solvers, better listeners, or better friends. So looking back on some experiences, research has said that a lot of people say that they learned coping skills they never knew they had and feel stronger and more resilient of what they went through. And if you are concerned about talking with them or talking about their future and yours, don't worry about putting that added stress on your parents, because they are your parents. They love you, and you want to be able to pick a good time when everyone's feeling calm, and bringing your concerns into the open allows you to talk with them, release your energy so you don't let resentment build. Even going to a counselor or advisors can be an added benefit of helping find some of these solutions and moving through this grief process. Now, for me, I did not have children in my marriage, but I can definitely relate to a lot of these feelings. It was difficult to keep a routine. It was difficult to accept what was happening. But through support and allowing myself to go through these feelings and reconnecting with individuals, I was able to come out stronger, better, and more mindful of my own feelings and what I want. By practicing good self-care and taking the time, you can move forward in a better place and not feel like it's your fault or have guilt, etc. So what about financial loss? As we're in this COVID-19 pandemic, we're losing jobs, parents are losing jobs, but also we have an increased access to financial management options, right? There are more debit cards, there's PayPal, there's all these other smartphone apps. So it's important for you to develop financial self-discipline, because it could be one of the greatest accomplishments that you do as a teenager. Banks have special accounts for teenagers with options for parental oversight, money transfers. Think about the things that you could be responsible for: car, rent, phone, insurance, gas, food. That adds up. So that's why it's really important for us to have budgeting, knowing the difference between credit cards and debit cards. When we just swipe a credit card, we're borrowing money, and then there's interest on top of that we have to pay back. Whereas our debit cards is the actual money that we have put in there and to spend on. So an example, if we are working 40 hours a week at only $9 an hour for 10 weeks per summer, someone can put around $10,000 in account over 3 summers. And that's a pretty good way of looking at things and how we can budget and save and think about the importance of a job, importance of responsibility, and also the importance of choosing to help our families. Tough economic times, affects us all in food, our home, retirement, belongings, insurance. And it's difficult when we can't meet our basic needs. So families might become torn apart or separated. Maybe you have to move in with an extended family member. And parents then also may react in a punitive or angry manner because they're stressed as well. And then you're facing more problems in school, loss of self-esteem, etc. So a lot of these things, as we can see, are linked, or there are experiences of loss that we might not have necessarily realized that affect us as a ripple effect. And homelessness, it's not just about the home, right? In Pennsylvania, 13,199 people are homeless in any given night. And this was a statistic in 2019. And 10.3 people per 10,000 are homeless in the general population. So students who are homeless have a higher chance of joining a gang, using alcohol and drugs, depression, attempting or committing suicide. And this impacts our self-esteem that can turn into these negative experiences. It affects our self-worth, and it faces a lot of stigma. People are also constantly losing identification documentation, right? People can't get their license because they don't have a birth certificate. They can't get a job because they don't have a social security card. And they don't have a social security card because they don't have their birth certificate. Your identity may be lost in a variety of ways. And this stuff might be sounding like a lot, or it's not going to affect me, or it's never going to happen to me. But just think about, in general, where we are at now and how much COVID-19 has impacted the loss of pretty much everything, not knowing what is going to happen next. And by experiencing homelessness, this is what we call as a disenfranchised grief. This is like a hidden grief or sorrow that refers to any grief that goes unacknowledged or unvalidated by social norms. So this is the kind of grief that is minimized by people that maybe don't necessarily understand. Because when we think of homelessness, some people are just like, well, they just need to get a job. They just need to do this. Can't believe they're doing that. But that's not the case. And it's important to think about that and ways in which we can help if we might be a little bit on the unfortunate side and we're seeing some of our friends and family struggling. Because again, it's not just about the home. We're losing our bed, memories, nostalgic things like photo albums, heirlooms. Maybe we're missing our favorite blanket or our younger sibling is their toy. And it's that comfort and stability that provides stability to us that we're missing. Because when we think about this is what we call Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This, in a way, dictates what order of importance different needs fall under. So they're saying before anything else is met, we need to have our physiological needs met. So we need food, water, warmth, and rest. From there, we can seek safety, and then we feel loved and belong, which increases our self-esteem. And then we have this process of self-actualization. So the majority of homeless people are still seeking ways to achieve their physiological needs. And when they're not met, they tend to overlook health issues and contributing to the lack of medical services in this population. So it's also important, though, to know that even though Maslow has said that all these needs go in a hierarchy, there are some criticisms that say, well, I need to feel safe first before I can have shelter and food, etc. And this just in general recognizes that us as humans, we have multiple needs. Maybe some needs are more pressing than others, but we are ultimately capable of fully realizing our potential. And thinking about parents who might sacrifice for us too. Parents might choose to go hungry if they need to feed their children, putting love above their own physiological well-being. So think about, where are your needs? Where are you at on this hierarchy? And what do you need more of? So what about, the loss of a family member? When someone dies in the family, the whole family system is thrown off. Grieving family members find themselves disinterested or maybe incapable of behaving in ways that they used to. So not only do they have to deal with the grief, they also must deal with the fact that a vital piece of that family is gone. And everyone has the right to grieve the death of a family member in their own way. We face it at their own pace. And you can reminisce about that family member as often as you want. I know for me, I talk to my grandmother almost every day, or at least she's on my mind. I have her picture in my room, and it helps me stay connected to her because she was a really big part of my life. I may not necessarily go to where she's buried because that's not where I feel her, but I feel her in other ways and carrying on her traditions. So what about the loss of senior year? I know this is monumental and it can be traumatic for your generation that already suffers high levels of anxiety, and it has put your generation at higher rates of such. Maybe you're thinking of how you missed out on experiences and the opportunity for connecting, yourself isolating. We're not used to being as isolated, and we experience maybe Zoom fatigue or the Google Meets fatigue that has so impacted us. And we can only look at social media so much before we fear of missing out, or we're not doing things that we should be doing. And it creates, again, that isolation, hard family dynamics. Maybe your family doesn't see it as a loss or not a big deal. But it is, because you had a spring semester that never came, or it's coming, and you don't know what 2021 is going to look like. So we recognize that change is hard. How can we adjust to change? Acknowledging your emotions, staying healthy, emphasize your achievements. Think of already how far you have come, things that you are already navigating or navigate it, and be proud of those, because that is what you deserve. And also trying to limit media consumption. We're seeing news everywhere. Sometimes we're like, do we believe this? Do we believe that? What's going to happen when I do go to college? Am I able to go to college? And we're putting ourselves in a tizzy. So what are some of the things that you can control and that can help you move through this time period in your life? So I'm going to take you here to this letter that I thought was pretty cool. It's from a graduating senior advice to the class that follows. So I'm going to go through this, and I just want you to take it in, because I graduated, right? And I'm not in your shoes. So by being able to give this letter to you of someone who's experienced it can help you grieve that loss a little bit more. Dear class of 2021 and beyond, it's long been customary at our school for seniors to offer advice to the classes that follow on our own. Accordingly, as a member of the class of 2020, I wish to address and acknowledge members of those other classes, particularly rising seniors who are anxious about their future as they're about handling the stress of college applications. To that, I am sorry. I'm sure, like me, you've heard this before, but that doesn't make it any less warranted or sincere. I'm sorry that your year and your plans have been interrupted, if not completely sunk by the pandemic. Whether it is sports, school dances, family vacations, hanging out with friends, performances and competitions, or even just the day-to-day minutia of school, I'm sorry that those opportunities have largely been taken away from you. If you or your school simply don't have the resources or means to transition smoothly to distance learning, then I'm sorry your academic progress and right to an education have been disrupted. And if you, like many students I know, treat school both as a place to learn and as an escape from a turbulent home environment, then I'm particularly sorry that you now must endure the toxic environment even more than you otherwise would have. I know that this time in your life is meant to be of growth, a liftoff of sorts from adolescence to young adulthood. I'm sorry that this pandemic has impeded you from taking flight. With that said, however, I'd push back on the notion that you are actually grounded. While it is understandable to be upset and disappointed by our present situation, it is unwise to allow ourselves to be paralyzed or limited as a result. It is up to you whether this quarantine becomes a period of discovery or stagnation. I would challenge you to be inspired rather than restricted by the adversity we're facing. Without the excuse of a lack of time, now is a perfect chance to pick up a new skill, chalk up a new accomplishment. I am attempting to have my writing published by a nonprofit journalism website. Turn obstacles into opportunities. View challenges as feats not yet conquered, and weave supposed disadvantages into possibilities. This is the best advice I can offer, based on the experiences of my own, albeit young life. Finally, pause as you begin this upcoming academic year. Whatever it may look like, just take a moment to appreciate the people around you, family, friends, teachers. For me, the saddest consequence of the pandemic is people I saw and spoke to just a month and a half ago, whom I will never see or hear from again. I played like my last varsity badminton match without even realizing it would be my final match. I told my teammates, see you tomorrow at practice, without ever considering the possibility that there would be no more practices. Treasure what you still have time to enjoy, whether that's sports, clubs, classes, or the precious company of fellow human beings. For better or for worse, life will never be the same again. It will be different, and you will learn to navigate in a different way. Finally, take a moment to review how far you've come before you focus on how far you have to go. These are the words I offer you on behalf of the class of 2020. So I found that extremely powerful. And the thing that I can say to you is, I am sorry. So with some of these other things, how can we get through the holidays? What feels right for you? That's going to be really important. Finding comfort in being with friends or family members, maybe trying to come up with new traditions, and using social media thoughtfully. I know when my grandmother passed away, my mom's mom, I wanted to continue her cookie traditions. I wanted to have Christmas like we've always had it. My mom did not really want to do that. And during our first Christmas without her, she spent a long time upstairs, not coming down to celebrate. And while that made me upset, I had to acknowledge that is how she is grieving and accepting things. And it's going to take her on her own time to come down and celebrate, in which, she did. But sometimes people may choose to celebrate in a new location. Maybe though they're going to save an empty seat at the table to remember them. And special days though can provide opportunities to remember good times that were once shared. It gives us a chance to think about, remember, talk about some of these actions that in ways that we can honor someone. And it helps others join you in the process of remembering. So remember though, there's no right way to honor a holiday, anniversary, or a special day. Each person, each memory is special. Again, maybe we can display photos next to the menorah, setting a place for them at the table, like I said, making favorite foods, toasting to them, hanging a special tree ornament, donating to a cause in their name, hosting a storytelling get-together where they share memories, etc. There are ways that we can cope and get through the holidays that make it okay for us and our grieving process. But I want you to know that you have rights, right? You have the right to experience outbursts. You have the right to treasure the memories. You have the right to talk about the grief. You can talk about it as often, as little as you want. You have the right to experience your own unique grief. You have the right to embrace your spirituality, whatever that may look like, or maybe you might start to embrace some of that. And you have that right to move toward your grief and heal. So resilience through grief. We're sort of like, well, what does this all mean? This is all sad and annoying, and I don't like talking about this. But there are some benefits and resilience that grief helps us become more understanding. We can begin to develop our maturity, that we are able to handle such strong emotions. We can accept things I can't change, grateful for every day, and we're more understanding of myself and my strengths. So this is just one of my favorite quotes with Winnie the Pooh that promise me you'll always remember you're braver than you believe and stronger than you seem and smarter than you think. So I just wanted to provide you with some of these graphics again to remind yourself to take care of yourself, practicing self-care and thinking about the new year. And I know it says 2019 in there, but this is just relevant for all the years to come. Things that we can start to do, new ways of connecting, how to keep our stress in check, self-care, relaxing, catching up, being physical, and just creating a new routine for us to stay healthy and safe. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday and stay safe, healthy, and enjoy.